second artifact text is Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest. I first read The Importance of Being Earnest in a university class, and I loved it immediately. I'd come across Oscar Wilde before. We'd read the short stories The Happy Prince and The Nightingale and the Rose in a different English class earlier in my degree. But I thought Importance of Being Earnest was really funny. It stuck out against the backdrop of all of the other modern plays that we were reading for the course, and I really liked the wit and the satirical kind of perspective that he took on it. And so I researched a little more about Oscar Wilde, and I read more of his material, including his popular novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. As The Importance of Being Earnest is a 19th century play, like a graphic novel, it's not something I would have immediately associated as proper literature, whatever that is supposed to mean. In previous years, I would have been much more quickly drawn to The Picture of Dorian Gray, but because I had stumbled across this, it really impacted me. I thought that it was different and it was unique, and it was something that was enjoyable. Wilde had originally named it The Importance of Being Earnest, a trivial comedy for serious people. The title in itself denotes the play as farcical and comedic, and something that's a little bit different. The main characters are Jack Worthing and Algernon Moncrief. These men have created fictitious personas in order to escape the burdensome social obligations of the 19th century upper class. Revolving around the problematic nature of marriage, the constraints of morality, and satirizing English society, the play has a lot to unpack. The Importance of Being Earnest shifted the way that I think about plays because I liked it so much. While I value Shakespeare, it never really spoke to me, and I've never really been a fan of the thee and thou, I bite my thumb at thee kind of language. It could be fun to do a lit circle unit, where all the choice books are short plays too. This would help shorten the amount of time required over, say, Daniel's 1994 lit circle model, so the class can move on to interacting with more texts. Giving students roles like discussion director, connector, and literary critic, like Daniel suggested, help engage each group member in the lit circle, while the open instruction aspect of students having relevant and educational conversations with other students helps shift the value of reading to being about experiential reading and learner responses. This enlivens classroom practice and contributes to creating a multiliterate class. I also like Atwell's take on readers and writers workshops through a heavy push for response groups and peer editing. I think that these skills are great to learn, but I do prefer Daniel's over Atwell's, and I would like to add a little bit more freedom when I eventually work on doing my own lit circles. When I look at the curricula for Lit Studies and Spoken Languages 10, I see that students are supposed to be able to explore text in a way that deepens our understanding of the world. I also see emphasis on the importance of critical thinking, and that people understand text differently depending on their worldviews and their perspectives, both of which can be discussed as a class, particularly through how the characters in this play seem to seriously lack critical thinking. Understanding that voice is powerful and evocative is another significant component of Spoken Languages 10, and I wanted to address it because I think that through teaching plays, particularly a variety of plays, like in a lit circle situation, and performing kinesthetic activities alongside the content, could be a fantastic method of teaching the emotion and the information that can come across through the pitch or speed or diction or whatever involved in someone's speaking voice. And finally, I save my favorite for last. The big idea that texts are socially, culturally, geographically, and historically constructed, and that language shapes ideas and influences others. I think the wordplay and the irony within The Importance of Being Earnest hits this part on the head. The play is old, but information on this time period, particularly in England, is really well documented. An entire lesson can be taught on the cultural, geographical, and historical factors which have gone into the formation of anything aesthetically Wildean. Even both of those terms have a lot of content that you can research for days or get master's projects in. This could be a great base for bottom-up lesson plan teaching approaches as well. Understanding by Design is discussed in Wiggins' Module A in this class. It states that understanding by design is predicated on the idea that long-term achievement gains are more likely when teachers teach for understanding of transferable concepts and processes, while giving learners multiple opportunities to apply their learning in meaningful, or as some prefer, authentic kind of contexts. The requisite knowledge and the skills that are learned and recalled through the process of actively constructing meaning and by transferring those skills to new situations is significant because it helps students learn and remember and be able to use the things that they're learning outside of a classroom environment. This is also because English language arts teachers begin by identifying their desired results. The entire understanding by design I found counterintuitive because it is different than a lot of the ways that I was taught growing up. And so by identifying their desired results, like how texts are socially, culturally, geographically, historically constructed, then they determine student assessment by deciding on acceptable evidence of learning. Then they can plan the learning experiences, like how I would use lit circles, or lessons, which can address the big ideas. And this is where specific novels or plays or literature of any kind come in, just like the importance of being earnest. So in other words, the importance of being earnest could be a part of this shift to creating understanding by design as opposed to understanding by good fortune. That is, we no longer want to just throw content and activities at the wall and hope that something sticks, or that different students can find at least a little piece of the way that they were teaching it before. And so I think that plays as a broader approach could be one way of achieving that. My third artifact text is October Morning, a song for Matthew Shepard. It's a third alternative format of novel because it's a poetry novel, and again, it's not something that I grew up reading in class or by my own choice. It is a young adult novel in verse by Leslie Newman, and it's nonfiction as well. So on October 6th, 1998, a gay 21-year-old college student named Matthew Shepard was lured from a Wyoming bar by two men. He was beaten, tied to a fence, and left to die. Gay Awareness Week was beginning at the University of Wyoming, and the keynote speaker was Leslie Newman. She was there to discuss her book, Heather Has Two Mommies. So, in a way, she's used October Morning with her 68 with her 68 poems as this really long coping method for the tragic act. And so it is her deeply emotional response through the fictitious monologues from various points of view. And so these kind of views include the fence that Matthew was tied to, the stars that watched over him, a visiting reporter who came to the scene, and Matthew himself. October Morning shifted the way that I think about reading poetry because it has so many different forms within one singular novel. The novel contains poems in verse, haikus, and even a poem which imitates some ancient Navajo prayers. There are narrative poems from the people and the objects that witnessed the night, found poems and list poems, and one that even mimics the style of William Carlos Williams' famous apology poem, This Is Just to Say. Comments, sources, and historical notes are also all included beside many of the different poems. I like that they all focus on a single event, versus the wordsworthy and nature poetry that I've had jammed down my throat, all about different things that I was never going to personally come into contact with. So the October Morning story comes together to make a singular chronological web of information. But while the poems are meant to be experienced as a cohesive unit, as a web, they could also be used independently in classroom discussions in order to study a particular type of poetry, like by studying a haiku from October Morning as well as a haiku from other pieces, so that you can address some of the content without having to devote an entire unit to studying this particular novel. So in this way, I think October Morning could be a very useful text in English Studies 12. The core competencies outline a desire for students to understand and appreciate how different forms, formats, structures, and features of text reflect a variety of purposes, audiences, and messages, of which I think the form of this novel is quite interesting again, as well as the unique purpose under which it was created, because of the message that the author was trying to get across. Additionally, the text content may lead students to recognize and identify personal, social, and cultural contexts. This can also help students realize specific values and perspectives in the text, including beginning discussions around gender and sexual orientations. October morning could also be used as an entry point to thinking critically, creatively, and reflectively in order to analyze ideas within or between or even beyond texts, because poetry often leaves many things implied but left unsaid and left to be discovered between the lines. So, in all, Persepolis, The Importance of Being Earnest, and October Morning are all very different texts. They're alternatives to the often mentioned grand narratives of the older curricula, and each one is about a different part of the world, in a time period and a society quite different than that lived by students in public BC high school classrooms. I like that none of them are novels. Novels are taught to some extent by every English language arts teacher that I've ever come across, and in order to add more variety and to make my own learning a little more unique, I really like the idea that you do have more freedom than that, and that there are plenty of resources that can be considered academic or classic or valuable that are not in that old curriculum canon. Thank you very much for listening to my autobiography. My name is Dea Kipchenko-Tropf, and those are some of my opinions. I would be really interested in teaching the 3 novels that I spoke about in any variety of high school classrooms in English or English language development. And because my second concentration is also social studies, I think that it would be really interesting to try and cross-curricularly involve some of those same themes in multiple classrooms. Thank you.